Okay, I mentioned that some shops use friction, some shops use nonlinears, other engineering firms do not. One reason why there is discrepancy is that there is no standard. The piping codes themselves say very little about nonlinear conditions in piping systems. The background of almost every piping code is hand calculations, and there was no time for nonlinear response in hand calculations. So let's wrap up this session by taking a look at how the piping codes affect the nonlinear conditions. Why would you want to use nonlinears anyway? Well, it gives you a better estimate of the real support conditions out in the field. Gaps on supports will increase occasional stress because if the pipe does not come in contact with the support will not take the load, but the pipe will have the load. The opposite happens with expansion stresses with gaps. A gap will reduce the expansion stress in the piping system. Friction will tend to decrease occasional stresses, but you should never take credit for friction in that situation. You want to see the worst case, not the best case with these models. And usually friction will increase expansion stresses. It adds more restraint. So when we talk about friction, a big rule is do not use friction to improve your results, and also be aware that the coefficient of friction may change over time. Now, what does the piping code say about nonlinear conditions? There's very little said about it. In B31.1, you're supposed to limit load variation, how much the change in the load on the piping system. If I have a spring in my model and the load changes by more than 25%, well, that's not a nonlinear condition, but it's a change in the support conditions, hot and cold. If those support loads change more than 25%, that's probably not a good spring to put in the piping system. In the Anvil's catalog that you get online, entitled Piping and Pipe Hanger Design and Engineering Catalog, it says limit rod rotation. Rods are supposed to be working in the vertical direction, and they should not swing more than 4 degrees. Again, the support line of action in the operating case should match the support line of action in the installed case. Keep the models similar between operating and installation. But there's very little else said about nonlinear conditions in your piping system by the codes. When we calculate our expansion stress range, CESR 2 by default always recommends operating minus installed to set up the expansion stress range calculation. Many engineers before that, in order to calculate the expansion stress range, would only analyze temperature plus other strain components like displacements. If the system is linear, T1 plus D1 is identical to L1 minus L2. But since this system can be nonlinear, in CESR 2 we always go to the operating position minus the installed position. Now, like I said, if the system's linear, T1 plus D1 alone, just the change in components, would be identical to L1 minus L2, where L1 has the T1, D1, and L2 does not. But evaluating thermal strain alone will not be sensible if you have nonlinear conditions. B31.3 has Appendix S, and in fact, in an earlier series in this course, Example 2, it talks about plus Y restraints in our system. Here's the operating system. We have a lot of dead weight sag in the middle of the span, and the support may not lift off, maybe it's resting. What we do in CESR 2, we take that position and we subtract from it the installed position, where it's pure deadweight sag. So this is thermal strain plus deadweight sag alone. I subtract those two, and it gives me the operating minus the installed position. That's the full range of motion. Now, because I have a nonlinear support here that can lift off, I cannot say that that load case is identical to this one. Here I'm looking at T1 plus D1. Look at the shape of the system where it lifts off that support. That's not the same shape I get when I subtract these two, operating minus installed. In fact, the highest stress in this model is at this lower elbow here. We're getting about 98, 99 megapascal at that elbow. When we do it the strict nonlinear way, we get over 158 megapascal at this elbow up here. It is wise if you have nonlinears to certainly do this type of expansion stress range check. 31.3 has several other references to nonlinear conditions. Here's an interesting one. In paragraph 302.1, It says sustained stress shall be evaluated considering every support configuration. In fact, that's what comes out of Appendix S, Example 2. So for every support configuration, in CSER 2, we use the weight plus pressure in the installed position. That is not the same thing that the code is saying. At Intergraph Catalyst Analysis Solutions, we've been setting up CSER 2 in this manner for over 25 years. We've had users say they want to find the sustained stresses with those liftoff supports removed, and you could go in your model and remove those restraints where liftoff occurs and run the sustained analysis stress case again without that support there. But it is our claim that if you lift off a support due to thermal strain and the pipe does yield, it's going to fall back down on the support, and that is a stress-limited analysis. So the change in support engagement between operating and installed is a thermal effect, and it has been well defended over the last several years. We also have a hot sustained approach that you can read about in our user's manual, that we take the operating minus the thermal range, and that is pretty much your hot sustained case. So it is our opinion, CSER 2 team, that liftoff is an expansion effect, and the consequences of liftoff is properly included in the expansion stress range evaluation. And no reason to double book that, and also included in the sustained case as well. Another reference to nonlinears in 31.3, paragraph P300A, Appendix P. Appendix P will removed from the 2014 edition of 31.3, so we're going to see this disappear. It says the method of evaluation provided in this appendix is more comprehensive than that provided in Chapter 2, the base code, and is more suitable for computer analysis of piping systems, including nonlinear effects such as pipes lifting off supports. What Appendix P does is it gets into a little more detailed evaluation of both the operating state and the expansion stress range in order to analyze the system with nonlinear effects a little more simple. One last point here we'll talk about after the break will be evaluating occasional stress, and it will be finished with nonlinears. This is very similar to the expansion stress range, but it also brings out the subtraction load case that we wish to analyze.